Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome all our Torah Anytime viewers. So tonight we are learning Li'ilui Nishmat Avraham ben Chaim Yehuda Yecheskel ben Abraham and Tzila bat Rabbi David, as well as for Refuah Shlema to Shira bat Sarah. Okay, so one announcement, and that is from Rabbi Rahimi on Back to Sinai, backtossinai.com. This is an organization that if they set up people to learn Torah, meaning like Torah partners. So if you, whichever level that you are on, you're able to go and get set up. Baruch Hashem, it's blowing up. So definitely be part of this revolution. Go check it out. Check the website. You should be able to sign up everything over there. If not, you could always email me and I will send you the link to sign up. Definitely recommend it to go and get this signed up. Okay, all right. Let us move on. So tonight we are continuing on the Pirkei Avos, and by the way, just look at how amazing Pirkei Avos. How amazing Torah is, right? So I think we're the 6th class in Pirkei Avos, and we're still in the first Mishnah. And I skipped over many things that I didn't end up speaking about, just to show you, and each class is about an hour, so you're talking about 6 hours in one Mishnah, and that's just like barely scratching the surface. Meaning that there are many times in our life that we have opportunities for growth. We tend not to see it, just like we go and we open up a Pirkei Avos, we open up a Mishnah, we open up a Sefer, we open up a book, whatever it is, and we start learning. And we just like skim through it, but did you ever imagine that you would be able to go and learn on one Mishnah over 6 hours of information that's in it? So there's so many stuff that is just right there, right in front of us that we could tap into, but we don't. We tend to just like let it skim over us. Just like there is so much bacteria, there's so much stuff just like floating in the air, that if we would be able to see the stuff that is just out there, we wouldn't be able to survive. There is so much information out there. There's so much stuff out there. But at least when it comes to learning, when it comes to growing, when it comes to be able to improve ourselves, we should look at every angle that we have to be able to tap into it. And you never know where that focus might be. When we spoke about the Divinity series, so that was a series about proving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, proving God, proving the Torah, answering questions. What was the reason that I went through 32 classes on it? The basic reason for it really is that everybody speaks to a different angle of a different proof. And the same thing is with Torah. You speak to something different. It could be of what you're going through in your personal life, right? So if you have an issue in your personal life with, let's say, relationships, whether it's with friends, whether it's with a spouse, whether it's with a child, whatever it is, then if you hear a class in it, you sort of like, pipe up and be like, let me listen to this. Maybe I could gain something from it. So everything that we're going through in our life, we tend to like focus it on a kind of a different angle than we would if it wouldn't be bothering us, or if it wouldn't be something that's on our mindset. So the beauty of this is that you could listen to a Torah class in one mindset, and you could get something out of it. And then you could listen to it from a completely different mindset, and you can completely get a completely different, outcome, from it. Meaning that you could listen to the same thing again and again and learn something every time a little bit different. So, going on with the first Mishnah. So the first Mishnah speaks about the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah and the 3 things that they said. We spoke about really one of them. We really spoke about having mesunim baden, be deliberate in judgment, be slow to judge. The next 2 things is really what I want to try to wrap it up tonight. And by the way, we could continue this, but I'm trying to wrap up the first Mishnah tonight. Ve'amidu tamidim harbe, which we're going to skip at least in the beginning, which means is to make many students, and literally the translation is to stand up many students, which we'll hopefully be able to explain today. But the focus where I want to start, the to make a fence for the Torah. So when we're dealing with fences, we're dealing with protective, fences. There are three aspects that I would like to speak about tonight, Be'ezrat Hashem, with Hashem's help. Number one is Torah, biblical fences. Number two is rabbinic fences. And number three is personal fences. Now, when we say fence, what we really mean is this protective, preventative measure to prevent you from, let's say, falling in something or hurting, whatever. The list goes on, and we'll soon see why. The idea behind going first to the biblical, then to rabbinical, and then to the personal is that if we learn about the fences that the Torah made, and we learn about the fences that the rabbis made, then when we come to our fences, we'll have a lot more clarity on how to make it. And really the bulk of the focus is going to be the biblical fences and the rabbinic fences, because I'm not going to need to focus on the personal fences, because you'll be able to, hopefully, B'ezrat Hashem, will be able to create a sort of a understanding that you'll be able to plug in your own personal fence. So first of all, we have to explain what is a fence. What is this terminology? So if, let's say you come to a sign that says landmines, and there's a fence on it. I actually remember this when I was in Israel, learning in yeshiva, somewhat like 20 years ago. I was we went on a trip. I don't remember if it was with my family or it was with the yeshiva, and there was a sign there that says landmines, and I didn't even know that this existed. I didn't understand. I'm like, why can't you just drive some sort of things across it? This is before robots, right? Drive some things across it, and just get rid of it. But whatever it was, the sign still existed over there, and there was barbed wire. I believe it was electrical fence. Also, landmines stay far behind. So when you go and you see this fence, you don't really ask questions. You're like, okay, no need to say anything else. I'm staying away from that. Just give it another example. So when I was in yeshiva, the way that my yeshiva worked, if you go into the building and you walk up to the third floor, that was where the base medrash was, and there was also dorms in the back of the building, in the back of behind the base medrash. So the interesting part is if you go up 3 floors, you'll see that the windows over there's bars on the windows. Now, my dorm was about 2 floors down. There was no bars on the window. And you think about why would you put bars 3 flights up? It's it's not nothing, okay, it's high, but it's not something, like crazy. And the reason for that is that a lot of Jerusalem, a lot of Yerushalayim is on hills. So even though you're walking into the building and you're walking 3 flights up, really when you look out the window, that's 6 or 7 flights down. So that is a significant thing because it's on a steep hill. So my dorm was, let's say, when you walk into the building, you have to walk 3 flights down, but it still had 2 flights to from the ground. So when you look at it, you can see that there is a fence over there, and you can see initially you could ask why are you putting a fence on the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor? Generally something high. Okay, I understand it. My yeshiva wasn't that type of yeshiva. You need to put a fence in every Baruch Hashem. You didn't need to put a gate in every window. So people can complain. It ruins a view, whatever, whatever people have issues, with fences. But in essence, once you look down, you see oh, wait a minute, this is really, really, really high up. Let me, make sure I prevent it. And then when you see the fence, you're like, okay, this is good that they put a fence. Now, when you look at people that complain of offenses, they complain for these things. Where would these complaints really be focused on? So if you put a fence in a place of danger, no one will ever say anything, right? If driving in Israel, I don't know why my mind's bringing back to Israel. Driving in Israel, there are certain roads that are, first of all, very narrow, and they have a cliff right near it. So if you see one of those little fences, those little metal fences over there, you're not going to be why are you putting a fence over here? It's logical. No one's going to complain about it. People are going to be that's amazing, that's great. It should be there. If you look at a fence where there are, landmines, you're not going to be like, come on, I wanted to go over there. You had to put this fence over there. No one in their right mind will be like, I can't believe that there's a fence over here. I really wanted to track through there. Now I have to walk all around. If there's a landmine, you'll walk an extra mile to 10 to 100 miles. You'll never go there because you'll never want to touch it. So no one will ever complain if there's a fence where there is a landmine. What about a pothole? This is not dangerous. This is a minor inconvenience, meaning that if you go and you're driving your car and there's a pothole and someone puts a fence around it, you're not going to be like, oh my God, I have to go around it. You're going to be like, no, like a big deal. I'll go around it, even if it's a detour, even if it's a 5-minute detour. You're not going to mind it so much because, it's protecting you for something. So where do people actually have problems when there are fences that are placed up? And soon you'll see why we're giving this type of introduction. Where people have a problem is where they don't realize the benefit of the fence. So I'll give you an example. Let's say there's a car that comes out, or a motorcycle, pick your fancy, and this car or motorcycle, it's like extremely powerful motor, like a very, very powerful motor, and the company that produces this said, this is too powerful for the consumer. They put a little like a block on the motor that it could only go up to a certain speed, and after that it doesn't allow the engine to go any higher. Now let's say you purchased this supercar, you purchased this super motorcycle, and you decide I have all this horsepower and nowhere to, I gotta be able to utilize this. So you hire a technician that's able to bypass this this block. You think I could be in control of myself. You don't have to tell me how fast I go. I can tell myself how fast I go. And you bypass it. Now, I don't know if anybody has ever, I've had this before, but I remember growing up, I was riding my bike, and I was a little kid. I still remember this. I don't know why it's so vivid. I had a little, tiny little BMX bike, and I was riding it so fast that my handlebar started shaking. And as it started shaking in my mind, I remember where it happened. I remember all it's crazy. And I remember it started shaking in my mind. I'm like, oh no, this is not good. And then there was, on my block, there was, growing up in Brooklyn, if you have a tree that's growing on the side, right? So there's, the city puts in trees every so often, right? Just besides the 6 blades of grass that you have in your front yard, you have also, let's say, a tree. But sometimes what the tree is, as it grows, it's so powerful, the growth of the tree, that it pushes the cement up, and there's cracks in the cement. And not only there's cracks, sometimes there's big bumps. And I was riding my bike very fast. I think I wanted to say how fast. I don't know, whatever it was. I can't explain the mind of a little kid. And it started shaking. And I realized that, oh no, this is not good. And then I saw that bump. I saw that ledge. And I get to it. As the second that I hit to it, that, I knew it was over. I remember, I was airborne. I was very, very bruised up. Now, the next time that I got on the bike, I wasn't riding it so fast anymore because I remember the pain that it caused me beforehand. Now imagine going back to our story over here where this guy has a supercar, super bike, super motorcycle, and he takes off all the blocks that they put onto it. He bypassed everything. And he's driving this motorcycle, he's driving this car, and all of a sudden it gets to a certain speed and it starts shaking. And then all of a sudden there comes a point in people's lives where sometimes you just realize and be like, uh-oh. This is not going to end well. And you're driving it fast, and then, God forbid, you go into an accident. What's going to happen after this guy recuperates from the accident? He's going to go back to the technician. He's going to be like, take my bypass off. Put it back the way that it was. There's a reason why it was before. And he puts back the block that the company originally put because he realizes the importance of it. So going back to our discussion, if you have a fence, if you have a protective barrier, if you have something that you're preventing yourself from falling into, But if you don't realize the benefit of it, if you don't realize the benefit of the fence, if you don't realize the benefit of this protective barrier, then you're not going to utilize it. When are you going to utilize it? Once you fall apart, and then you come to the conclusion and be like, you know what? Maybe, just maybe there's something wrong with my, with my understanding, and let me put this fence back. So, a big reason why we either do not put fences on our personal life, or we don't live up to the fences that already exist. And again, if you don't follow me what fences is, soon you'll understand. The reason that we don't put fences is that we don't see it as a big deal. Be like, what's the big deal? What's the big deal if I mess up this mitzvah? What's a big deal if I do this avera? Right? If somebody goes and somebody doesn't see, let's say, the benefit or the power or the importance of kibbud avayim, so be like, okay, so what's the big deal if I don't answer my parents' call? What's the big deal if I don't speak so respectfully? What's the big if you don't see the importance, you're not going to go and work hard on it. The more important something is to you, the more that you're going to focus on it. So why do so many people not put fences? They think, what's the big deal? It's not such a big sin. It's not. So what if I missed a minyan? So what if I didn't dress modestly? So what if you don't see it as a big deal? Then guess what? You're not going to put the fences, and you're probably or possibly going to fall. If you look at, let's say, somebody who has to wake up for an important flight, and they have to wake up at 4 a.m. Now, this is a person that can never wake up on time, right? At 8 o'clock, forget about it. Like, 7 o'clock, there's no chance. 9 o'clock, if you're lucky. 10 o'clock, that's a sweet zone. But let's say they have a flight. They have an important flight. They paid a lot of money to it. They're going on a vacation, whatever it is that they're going, a business meeting, and they have to wake up at 4 a.m. What are they going to do? They're going to put one alarm clock on their phone. And then they're going to buy another alarm clock to put in. Then they're going to put the vibration alarm clock that they would be able to put on their bed. So they will go from one to another to go and to make sure that they are able to go and make sure that they wake up on time. Now, why is it that they're able to make sure that they wake up 4 a.m. for this flight, but when it comes to minyan, when it comes to davening, or when it comes to waking up for work, they're not able to wake up? What is the difference that here you're able to wake up and here you're not able to wake up? So the common answer would be, well, here is once in a while. Like if someone flies every single day or very often, then okay, maybe it'll be hard. This is once in a blue moon, so then that's why they're able to do it. But really, the underlining reason is this is important to you and this is not as important to you. If this would be as important to you, you would make sure that you would also be up at that point in time. So the way that we kind of live our life, it would be dependent on what we see as important and what we see as not important. If somebody goes and decides that A is important, then they would put protective fences, they would put measures that they should be able to go and accomplish A. If they think A is not so important, so sometimes they'll do it, sometimes they won't do it. Maybe they'll do it more often, maybe they won't do it more often, depending on the day, depending on the day. It all depends on what you feel the worth is. So, when we look and we decide on what to put our fences on and what to put our worth on, this is something that we can kind of relate, would be directly dependent on how important that thing is for us. So, with that understanding, let's look at some of the fences that the Torah brings down. Now, people don't really know this or realize this, that people think that when there's fences, that when we say that there's fences, that means that if you're not supposed to go 50 feet to point A, a fence would be you put it at 100 feet, just to be extra careful, right? So if you have 50 feet landmines and your kid is playing near that area, you tell that kid 100 feet, well, you'll probably tell the kid, play somewhere else. But let's say you have nowhere else, you'll tell that kid 100 feet, that's where you have to, after that, it's landmines. Oh, wait a minute, but no, it's 50 feet. No, you're putting an extra protective fence, on top of that because you're so nervous about it. It's so important to you that you step on a landmine, that's death. So you have to be super, super careful. So because of that, you tell the kid an extra 50 feet. So the fence is that extra 50 feet. The Torah has fences on the command on certain commandments. Now let's go through a few of them to understand maybe a little bit of the background of why the fences were put into place. So the pasuk in Vayikra, in chapter 18, verse 19, speaking about Nida. Ve'el isha benidas tumasa. We're talking about an isha in the time of her Nida. Le sikrev legales ervasa. You're not allowed to come close to uncover the erva. Now the question, the ervasa, why is it that the Torah says le sikrav, don't come close? If there is a prohibition, the prohibition will be, do not do this. Here, the Torah does not say the prohibition. The Torah says sort of like you have to distance, don't even come close to the prohibition. Stay a little bit further. The Torah itself was putting a fence around that prohibition, meaning that saying, don't go close to it. You might think, okay, I can't do X, but maybe I could do Y, maybe I could do Z, maybe I could do A, maybe I could do B. The Torah says, no. Stay away. Stop. When we come to rationalizing certain things, and if you'll see, there is a theme, right? There's certain things in the Torah that are very big temptations. The Torah says you gotta put yourself in a distance, because if you don't put yourself in a distance, you're gonna end up falling in it. So the Torah says over here, Le sikrav legales ervasa. Don't even come close to it. Meaning, it's not just the sin. It's not just the main issue, but it's also the distance you have to stay far away from it. The Rambam says that regarding bearing a grudge, what was the Torah's prohibition on bearing a grudge? Again, of course, we know that you're not allowed to bear a grudge. Now, what was the reason for not bearing a grudge? That, the Rambam says, is a precautionary measure that one does not take revengeful action, meaning that do not bear a grudge in a sense like a fence, that you don't take revenge on a person. Now, of course, there's a lot to speak about a grudge, because really, in essence, if you're angry at somebody else, if you're holding a grudge on somebody else, that affects you a lot more than affects anybody else. In fact, it affects you 99%. Maybe it affects the other person 1%. If whatever, we'll not get into that 1%. But really, if you have an anger towards somebody else, that affects you. It ruins your day. You see that person, you think about that person, you read about that person, it affects you. It doesn't affect the other person. So bearing a grudge is non-productive, non-useful in any means, way, or form. But the Torah, when the Torah says you're not allowed to bear a grudge, the Rambam explains that that's a precautionary measure, that you're not going to actually do something based off that emotion, based off that feeling. The Kesef Mishnah goes on a different example. Cooking a milk and meat together. What was the reason that you're not allowed to cook meat and milk together? It's a precautionary measure. It's a fence not to go and eat what you cook. The Rashbam in the Gemara in Bava Basra, the prohibition of keeping an imprecise weight. So the way that it used to work in the olden days is that if, let's say you would want to buy whatever, anything from food to gold, it would be based on weights. So you have, let's say, a 1 pound weight, you could, depending on the ounces, pounds, whatever. Let's say you have a 1 pound weight. So you have, or 1 kilo weight, depending, probably everything back then was in kilos, right? You have a 1 kilo weight, and then you put on the scale 1 kilo, and then you could see how much of the food or whatever it is that you're weighing over there. But some people that were not so scrupulous, or maybe they were a little bit on the sketchy side, they went and they took a 1 kilo weight or 1 pound weight, and instead of writing, they wrote 1 pound on it or 1 kilo on it, but it was really 3/4 of that, 75% of that. So the Torah has a prohibition that type of weight, if you have a weight that's really 0.75 of a pound, and the mark on it says it's 1 pound, you're not allowed to keep that in your house. Why you're not allowed to keep it in your house? Says the Rashbam, that's a precautionary. That's so that one will not come to accidentally or on purpose use it. So it's sort of a fence. Do not keep that near, because you might end up coming to use it. Rabbeinu Nisim says that one should not, the prohibition of not having chametz in one's possession is that one should not come to eat it. Now let's use that as an example. What's the deal of not having chametz in your house? You're allowed to have treif in your house. I wouldn't recommend it, but you're allowed to. You are not allowed to have chametz in your house on Pesach. Why not? So the punishment for chametz, eating chametz on Pesach, is kares. It's getting cut off from God. We have a whole class on this. I'm not going to go into this. Now we have a class on the 3 types of kares, but the idea behind it is that it's so severe, it's so problematic to have it, that you don't go and you don't even put it in your house. It's kares. Like, kares is a high level. It's like desecrating Shabbos. So you don't even have it in your possession on Pesach. There are certain things that the Torah we see over here put a fence. And by the way, this is a big chiddush for many people. People don't realize. People think, fences, that is the rabbis that they put on. No. They have many instances where the Torah put fences on themselves, on the mitzvos. One of the reasons is that because of the severity of the sin, or because of the importance of the sin, and because you don't realize that the sin, the Torah puts extra precautionary measures to it. Let's advance to the next level, and that is on rabbinical sins. Rabbinical fences. Now, before we get into rabbinical fences, we have to answer a question. But before we answer the question, we have to ask the question. And the question is, how do the rabbis come and make rabbinical fences? So rabbinical fences would be, the rabbis say you can't do this, whatever this is, fill in the blank. You can't do X. How could the rabbis say you can't do X? The Torah very, very explicitly and very, very straightforward says in 2 places, in Devarim chapter 13 verse 1, it says, Kol hadavar she'anochi mitzaveh eschem. Everything that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is saying, God is saying, everything that I commanded you to do, I say tishmu, you have to guard it. La'asais, to do, lo'isaysiv alav v'lo'isigra menu. You're not allowed to add to anything that I said, and you're not allowed to take away. Which means is that you're not allowed to add any commandments. So how did the rabbis come and say, this you're not allowed to do? Wait a minute. The Torah doesn't say that I'm not allowed to do that. So how did the rabbis come and say that I can't do that? Another pasuk is in Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 2. It says, you're not allowed to add to whatever I commanded you, and you're not allowed to take away. Rashi over there gives examples, and the examples are that could go in chamisha parshias. You're not allowed to take your tefillin and put 5 parshias. It's supposed to be 4. You're not allowed to add a 5th parshias. You're not allowed to take your lulav and esrog and add a 5th min. You're supposed to have 4 minim, right? You're supposed to have 4 things in your lulav and esrog. You have the lulav, the esrog, the hadassah, and the rabbis. Have 4 things. You're not allowed to decide and say, you know what? I'm adding a watermelon. I'm going to come into shul, a lulav and esrog, and I'm going to hold a watermelon for whatever reasons, right? I got to show my muscles. I got to be able to hold a watermelon. It's a ripe watermelon. You're not allowed to go. You're not allowed to add in it. So the question is that if you can't add to it, how can the rabbis say this is forbidden? How can the rabbis come and say you're not allowed to do this? If the Torah says that you're not allowed to, if the Torah says that you are allowed to do that, how could the rabbis come and add a protective fence? Because that's really the reason why the rabbis are adding additional prohibitions, is as a protective fence. But how could they do that if the Torah says that you're not allowed to? So the Rambam many explains this, and the explanation is as follows. We'll use the example of cooking meat and milk together. The pasuk in Shemais, in Exodus chapter 23 verse 19, says regarding eating milk and meat together, you're not allowed to cook a baby goat in its mother's milk. Now, the biblical prohibition from the Torah, that means that you're not allowed to cook milk and meat. That's what you're not allowed to cook. But what about fowl? What about chicken and cheese? Turkey and cheese, duck and cheese. Let's say you were able to make a cheeseburger a cheeseburger that's made from fowl, from chicken, turkey, ducks. Are you allowed to eat that? So biblically, from the Torah, you're allowed to eat that. Rabbinically, you're not allowed to eat that. The rabbis came and says, fowl, you're also not allowed to eat. Now let's try to explain how and why they were able to go and say this you're not allowed to if the Torah says you are allowed to. So the Bezdin goes and they did a simple study, a very, very careful study. And they saw that people intuitively associated chicken with meat. It looks the same. If you grind it, it looks very similar. So people, what ended up doing is they ended up eating, let's say, chicken and milk together, and technically it was allowed. But one person says, wait a minute, that looks like meat, so they're probably eating meat and milk, that's probably allowed. So they started eating meat and milk also, and it was actually a biblical prohibition. So the rabbis came and they said, you know what? People are falling on biblical prohibitions over here, that you're not allowed to eat milk and meat together. So now we're going to add on that you can't eat milk and fowl together, because it's very closely related, and people will get confused and they will end up falling into this prohibition. So the rabbis way back made a prohibition that you're not allowed to eat chicken and milk together. And the reason was, it was to prevent these drastic errors. Because people, besides the error of just looking at it, people might say, wait a minute, if the meat and fowl, if meat and chicken is permitted, because it does not state explicitly in the Torah that meat and chicken is prohibited, so maybe undomesticated beasts or animals is also permitted, because it does not state explicitly, and really it's not allowed. Another person might come and might say, wait a minute, the Torah says the meat of a goat is not allowed to be eaten with the milk of a goat. But what about meat of a goat with milk of a cow? Maybe that's allowed. And because it's a different species. And biblically, that's not allowed. But people might come to the confusion and say that it is allowed. Or somebody else might come and say, well, meat of a goat with goat milk of its mother is not allowed, but what about meat of a goat with goat's milk that's not its mother? Maybe it is permitted, right? Because the pasuk says, "Lei savashal gedi b'chalevi mai." Don't cook a baby goat with its mother's milk. What about someone else, another mother's milk? And really, biblically speaking, you're not allowed to cook any meat with any milk. Fowl is a different thing, but meat, like from an animal, from any domesticated or undomesticated animal, you're not allowed to cook the meat and the milk together. So people will come to radical and drastic errors. So the rabbis came in and said, you know what? We're banning it all. We're banning the chicken. We're banning fowl. We're banning meat. It's just to make it across the board, because people are going to fall into this. And if people are going to fall into this, it's going to be very, very problematic. So let's just ban all the meat and milk together. So the question is, how could the rabbis come and ban this if biblically it's allowed? And the answer is that the rabbis are allowed to come and say, this eating chicken and milk is allowed from the Torah, but us, the rabbis, we forbid it. Meaning that they didn't add to the Torah. They didn't say that this prohibition is a biblical prohibition. They didn't say from the Torah. God said from the Torah and the written. Even God said through the. We'll soon see how God said also through the rabbis. But it doesn't say like through the Torah that you're not allowed to eat chicken and milk together. Min Torah, the rabbis say you're allowed to do it. You really are. You're allowed to do it. But the rabbis, we added a protective fence. We added a prohibition that you're not allowed to do it for reasons X, Y, and Z, and for obvious reasons that we were able to to see. So that is not adding to the Torah. That is adding a protective fence, and that is allowed. So where it becomes problematic, where it becomes not allowed, is that if the rabbis came and say, you know what, we didn't add this. This is from the Torah. This is the Torah. This is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is a biblical commandment that you're not allowed to do it. That's adding to the Torah. That's adding that we're not allowed to do. But the rabbis are allowed to come and say, biblically, this is allowed. Rabbinically, we're not allowing it because X, Y, and Z. So, where does this come to differentiate? You look at, let's say, rabbinic law. This is stated clearly. But you look at, for example, Christians come and they remove the Torah. They say the Torah is no longer applicable. All the laws, all the obligations, right? The Torah, according to the Christians, they're allowed to eat anything and everything, right? At least the Muslims, they come and say, okay, halal. There's certain pig they don't eat. There's certain the hachsherim that they have to go according to. Christians, anything goes, no problem. Oh, but wait a minute. The Torah, which they believe in, the Old Testament, as they call it, says that you're not allowed to. So they say, no, That's null and void at this point in time. So that is going and it's taking away from the Torah. Which again, I don't know how they could come to this conclusion and feel satisfied with it, because it's like in the instruction manual, in the Torah, in the Old Testament, it says, don't remove any of the commandments. And they come and they say, oh, we're removing the commandments. How do you answer that? Oh, there was a second version that came up. Oh, but the first version said it's not going to remove. If there's an all-knowing God, and there's an all-powerful God, and the God that knows the future, if there would come a time where God in the future would say, you know what? I am only keeping this Torah for a certain period of time. Afterwards, we're going to go to the Christian thing. Then there would have been a caveat. There would have been something written in the Torah saying, by the way, this is going to happen until X, Y, and Z. Why wouldn't God, who knows the future, say that? The answer is because it's made up. They made it up. There's no source whatsoever. There's no reason whatsoever. The Torah says that the Torah will never be changed. The Christians come and they change it. They say, no, it's null and void. Even though the Torah says you can't remove any, not even one mitzvah. They remove, I would say all of it. If not, and not only they remove it, they also add. What do they add? They add obligations. Now you have to believe in their Messiah. That's a commandment. Wait a minute. There's nowhere in the Torah that says you have to believe in the Messiah. There's nowhere. Otherwise, you're not going to get. They added certain things, meaning that they completely, skimmed over very, very important aspects of the Torah. Meaning that if you have somebody that's trying to prove a point to you, and they're so obviously wrong, and when you prove to them, they're like, oh, no, it doesn't count. And they just completely skim it over. You begin to realize, okay, maybe this person has no idea what they're talking about. Like nothing doing. So this is why the rabbis were allowed to add protective fences, because they added fences. They didn't change anything to the Torah. The Torah has and will always be the same. Whatever the Christian says is wrong. Whatever the Muslim says is wrong. The Torah is non-changing. The rabbis added certain protective fences. This from the Torah, allowed. Rabbinically, not allowed. And this a source for this is in Vayikra, in Leviticus chapter 18, verse 30. It says, "U'shemartem es mishmarti." HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God in the Torah says, guard, you should observe my commandments. You should observe my, meaning you have to guard it. That you have to prevent, you have to make yourself these protective fences, because that's how you're going to protect my commandments. You have to put a safeguard for my commandments. How do you safeguard something? You block it off, right? If you have something expensive, you don't leave it out in the open. You block it off. You put it in a safe. You put it in something that's guarded. So if we have something that's so holy, so special to Torah, we should make sure that we're putting a protective fence around it, to making sure that it's staying holy, that it's staying pure, no matter which situation that we arise in. The idea that the rabbis needed to come and add protective fences is really because of something called Yeridas Hadairos. Yeridas Hadairos means there's a reduction of the spiritual standing. As the generations go further on in time, as we go further away from Kabbalah Torah, from getting the Torah in Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai, the spiritual standing goes lower and lower and lower and lower, unfortunately. And that is why the rabbis of, let's say, this generation, we don't argue with the rabbis of 500 years ago, because they were so much greater than us. And if they said something, that stands. And that's why you have certain things. You have like the Mishnah, and then you have the Gemara, and then you have the Ga'inim, you have the Rishonim, you have the Achronim, you have different, and one group doesn't argue unless there is a source for it, but one group doesn't completely argue with the previous group, because they were much greater than us. So what happens is that because of the reduction of the spiritual standing, there are more and more fences that we need to put on, that in the previous generation, it was never needed because of their high spiritual standing. Now, this is even in the time of King David. In King David, he had to issue a prohibition against yichud, seclusion, with an unmarried woman. Originally, biblically, it's just with a married woman, but King David had to add unmarried women due to certain circumstances that arose. Rabbeinu Gershom, for example, a little bit over 1,000 years ago, made a prohibition. It was a takana on this is in the Ashkenazi community on polygamy. There used to be allowed to marry more than one wife. Many people can't handle one wife. I don't know how they're going to handle multiple wives, but according to the Torah, you're allowed to. But Rabbeinu Gershon saw that there was there were issues that were coming up. So he said from now on only one wife. And this was more in the Ashkenazi community as opposed to the Sephardic community. Another example of a rabbinic prohibition is that having a hot bath on Shabbos at one time was allowed. Obviously, that the water was heated before Shabbos. But what happened is that there were bath attendants, and there were people that were taking hot baths on Shabbos on water that was heated before Shabbos, but these bath attendants, maybe they were not so knowledgeable, whatever the reasons were, they started heating water on Shabbos. So the rabbi said, you know what, this is becoming problematic. They're desecrating Shabbos, so now we're going to have to make a rabbinic prohibition that we're not allowed to have hot baths on Shabbos, because even though if it was heated before and you would be allowed to, but now we're saying, even if it was heated before and you're not allowed to. Why? Because maybe some of the bath attendants will go and start heating water on Shabbos. To understand this, the rabbis adding, I think it's important to discuss. There's three aspects of what the rabbis added. So there is something called a gzeira, there is something called a takana, and there's something called a minhag. These are the three categories of the rabbinic portion of halacha. Just to give you a little bit of an overview on it. So a takana is a positive enactment, meaning this is something that will protect the principles of the religion and Torah. That's a positive enactment, and we'll give examples. A negative enactment is gzeros. This is to prevent. This is more like offense, to prevent certain breaches of halacha. So let's start with a gzeira. Example of a gzeira that the rabbis created and put in is that you're not allowed to eat poultry with dairy. Something that we spoke about. This is the rabbis created a protective fence, a gzeira, and saying don't do this because it can come to X, Y, and Z. And by the way, if somebody goes and eats chicken with meat, they're over on an isser. That's a prohibition, and they're, we don't want to speak about punishment. Well, maybe we should, but they're going to get punished for that. If the rabbi said that you're not allowed to do something and you do it, you get punished for that. That's considered a sin. Based off of, again, there's verses that we spoke about, and we spoke about this in the Divinity series, if you want to go back to it, on rabbinical prohibitions. But the gzeira is that you're not allowed to eat poultry with dairy. Another gzeira is that from the Torah, on Erev Pesach, you're not allowed to eat or possess chametz from midday. From midday and on, you're not allowed to do it. The rabbis added 2 hours because they saw that maybe on a cloudy day, people won't know exactly what midday is, and people will make a mistake, and it's a chiyuv of kares, very severe. So they took an additional 2 hours and says 2 hours before midday, you're not allowed to go and you're not allowed to eat or possess, chametz. And this concept of adding laws to an existing body of law is not just new to Judaism. Every government, every society always has to add laws. To just like in our days, Congress has to constantly add new laws, new regulations, because the old laws are not always adequate. Maybe there is modern trends. Maybe there's things that that change. So just like there's change in society in governmental regulations, so too there are changes to the spiritual regulations, because the time changes and we have to adapt with the time, and we have to add either the protective fence, we have to add guidance to the new times. Another example would be that if in the olden days there was no speed limit. Right? Well, you had horses and buggies, right? As fast as your horse goes, that's as fast as you can go. But now, with the new day and age of cars and transportation, you have to have a speed limit. Growing up in Brooklyn, the speed limit was 30 miles per hour. Now you drive in Brooklyn, the speed limit went down to 25 miles per hour. But wait a minute. Why did it go down from 30 to 25? And by the way, that 5 miles per hour makes a big difference. Why did they do it? And one of the reasons is they wanted to eliminate traffic deaths. It was a crazy study. On average, every 2 hours, not every day, not once in a while, on an average, every 2 hours, another New Yorker either got killed or seriously injured on a 2-hourly basis. So they decided we got to do something about it, and they reduced the speed limit to 25 miles per hour because of that. So what was not necessary previously all of a sudden became necessary due to the overpopulation and the speed limit, whatever the reasons were, and that's why there's cameras. There's many reasons why they had to enact it. It's not only about making the city money; it's also about preventing injury and preventing deaths. So the gzeros were things that were enacted by the rabbis to prevent certain breaches in the Torah. A takana, on the other hand, is something that would enhance communal life. An example of a takana is to light candles on Hanukkah. This is a holiday. This is a rabbinic holiday that we light candles on Hanukkah. This is not from the Torah. This is a rabbinic holiday, and this is a takana. Another takana is something that we discussed, is the prohibition, especially for Ashkenazi Jews, of polygamy from Rabbeinu Gershom. This is a takana as well. That's something to enhance communal life. So gzera is more in the negative, a takana is more in the positive. And finally, a minhag, a custom, a translation of a minhag is a custom, is something that, I'll give you an example. There used to be now it's a custom, but it used to be a gzera, where outside Israel, there would be certain holidays would have a second day to it. The reason is that the exact date of the holiday might be unknown by the time, meaning that the way that the holidays used to, be determined is that you would have witnesses that would look for the new moon, and once they have the new moon, then they would go to Beis Din, they would testify, and there would be a whole thing, and that's when they enact, okay, this is when the month begins, and once we know when the month begins, now we know when the holiday begins. It's not like the Shabbos. Shabbos is every 7 days. The holiday depends on when Beis Din decides of when the month begins. So. And this is only in Israel. So what happens if someone living outside of Israel? So in Israel, they can say, okay, you know what? The new month begins today, but by the time, there was no internet, there was no phone calls over there. By the time the information reached outside of Israel, it could be, another date. So there was a gzera, there was a rabbinical enactment that said outside Israel, you would have to keep the holiday 2 days because you wouldn't be certain which day would be the holiday, because you wouldn't be certain which day would be Rosh Chodesh, either this day or the next day. So once the mathematical calendar came into being, and we knew exactly when the holidays were happening, even outside of Israel, we didn't need to look at the new moon. There was no need for the testimony because we had the mathematical calendar. The rabbis kept the 2-day holiday outside of Israel, not because of a gzera anymore. Now it was because of a minhag. It was a custom because of it. Now again, we spoke about this in the Divinity series. I'm not going to go into in depth. There's reasons that we spoke about for why there needs to be 2 days of a holiday on outside of Israel nowadays, even though we know exactly when it happens. But now that is a that is a custom, that is a minhag. And in fact, the Ramah, when speaking about minhagim, the Ramah, Rav Moshe Israelish, this was very, very strict on minhagim, and this came about from when he was a young rabbi in the Krakow community. And what happened was that there was a minhag over there. There was a custom over there that the caretaker of the mikvah the next day after the woman went to the mikvah, would go over to the man and would wish the man a mazel tov, right? Because hopefully, whatever, it would produce a mazel tov. And when the Ramah came and became the rabbi, he was like, "This is very inappropriate. Why are we doing this?" And he goes over to the caretaker. We're stopping this minhag. We're stopping this custom immediately. And, the caretaker said, fine, whatever the rabbi says. And a few days go by, and there was a person the community that went over to the caretaker and says, I don't understand. He says, how come you didn't give me a mazel tov? So the caretaker says, well, two reasons. Number one, the Ramah, said that we don't do this anymore. But number two, why would I give you a mazel tov? Your wife never came to the mikvah. And when this came back to the Ramah now realized the reason for the minhag, meaning that the minhag was that this sort of gave like a double check of like that the woman went to the mikvah. This woman never went to the mikvah, but she went and told her husband that she went to the mikvah. Now the Ramah sees the importance of this minhag, and he put this minhag back into place. And then from then on, he was very, very meticulous on the minhagim. And no matter how minor or how unwarranted or maybe how we don't understand it doesn't make any sense. He said any minhag that the Jewish people kept, we have to keep and we have to continue with it. So that is the rabbinical fences. Let us speak about the personal fences. With that information, even though the hour is late, let's speak about what it means to have personal fences. So we spoke about biblical fences. We spoke about rabbinical fences. And taking that information, now we can plug it into personal fences that we make. Throughout the centuries, there was an increased number of fences and chumras and prohibitions that had been accepted on in the Jewish practice. And, the reason is not because we're doing so well that we're taking more on, but because, unfortunately, the Yeridus Hadaras, where there's ongoing deterioration in our nation's spiritual level, and there was a need to add on these spiritual fences. Similar to the idea that you look at, let's say, for example, baby formula. The invention of baby formula was a necessary thing, but it wasn't a positive thing, because a mother's milk is much better than baby formula. But the problem is, women became busy. A majority of women. Okay, I'm not talking about the rare cases, but the majority of women became busy and said, you know what? I can't, they can't feed the baby. So we have to make formula. So it came out, it wasn't a positive, it's helping us now, but it wasn't a positive thing, because the best thing would be for the baby to get milk from its mother. But as a second best, now that we have this, the formula. The rabbinical fences, all these decrees, they're not, it's beneficial for us and it's important for us, but it's not something like in a positive sense, like, oh, now we have more to deal with. And it's because of our spiritual ongoing deterioration that we needed it. It was a necessity. And if we continue with that theme, we understand that the test that we have today is a test that we never had before. The technological advancements. These are things that our ancestors never had to deal with. A phone? Like, for what's a phone? You're talking about 150 years ago. What would be a phone? Like, what would even, like, and take it a step further. Now it's a smartphone. Now it's a video chat. Now that, you can't even begin. And now you have internet on your phone. Now you have the whole world on your fingertips. You have not only that, you have it in a split second. First there was 3G, then there was 4G. Now you have 5G. You have so fast. You're able to download things of such magnitude, I guess, like volume or I don't know what the right word is, gigabytes of information instantly on your phone wherever you are on planet Earth, almost, if you have service, right? This is something that our ancestors never had to deal with. Recent AI, artificial intelligence. Forget about our ancestors never had to deal with this. You never had to deal with this 5 years ago, 2 years ago. You never had to deal with this. We don't even know the test that's going to come out because of that. Robotics, we don't even begin to understand not only the complications about the outcomes of what will come from these technological advances. We're going to have to create some sort of. There's going to be something that's needed to be created for it. In our day and age, we have more free time than anybody in history ever had. We have lights, like in the olden days,
night, when the sun goes down, the day is over. All right, if you're wealthy, you had some candles, you had some, you're able to put something, but the day was practically over. We have access today to so many things that we've never had before. So that produces more problems, more benefits, but more problems also. And we have to add these protective fences to make sure that we adapt with, the times in the spiritual sense. Now, each person knows their own problems. Each person knows what they're dealing with. Each person knows what they're going through, and each person has to adapt their own fences. Each person has to decide, I need to filter. You know what, I need to... You know where your issues are, and you have to add in your own fences based on your issues. We see how the Torah added fences. They added fences on things that were very important, very problematic. We see how the rabbis added fences because the things that were falling apart, people were falling into biblical sins, so they had to start adding fences. If we take that information and we plug it into our own life, we have to start thinking, okay, where do we need to add our fences? Where do we need to go and plug in and say, you know what, this is where I need to fix myself, or this is where I need to fix myself, this is where I have an issue. If you ever see somebody who's, let's say, a drug addict, and you see how they live, all of a sudden you'd be like, you know what, I never want to get into that thing. You'll all of a sudden becomes important to you, and you decide, you know what, I'm going to make sure that I never do X, Y, and Z because I see how bad it is. If you see how much you have a person that's smoking, I had a person that was doing work, around the house recently, and a non-Jewish person smokes like a chimney. My wife was looking at this person, and she was like, maybe I have to just watch it because it looked like he was gonna go. I have to call Hatzalah or 911 any minute. And this person's sitting over there, barely able to breathe, and they're still smoking. And they're still doing, and be like, wait a minute, what's going on? You're in and out of the hospital. You can't breathe. Why are you continuing down this path? So if you see something, I'll be like, you know what? I never want to touch a cigarette in my life. Look at if you start seeing that, you see a drug addict, I'd be like, wait a minute. This is what I never want. You see someone who's drunk, you'd be like, why would I ever want to be like this? Someone who's puking on himself, someone who's talking nonsense, someone who's walking, in a non-straight line. Why would I ever want to do that? Someone who is angry, and you see that they lose their family from it. A gambler who goes and loses their house, loses their parnasa, loses their livelihood, loses everything. You start seeing wait a minute, what? And you start building yourself fences because you start looking and be like, I never want to become like this. I never want to fall into this category. The Chovos HaLevavos tells us, and we're going to be finishing in a few minutes, the Chovos HaLevavos tells us that if a person sees that his generation is becoming morally loose, it's proper for him to go and act even stricter than what's the going rate, let's just call it. Because in a storm, if you have ever walked in a hurricane, you can't just walk regular. You have to lean into the wind. Why do you have to lean into the wind? Because the wind is pushing you, and if you want to walk, you have to lean in. You can't just walk normal. Right now, we are in a spiritual storm. There are things brewing. There are things that are moving around. It's not enough to say, you know what? Okay, fine. We'll deal with whatever the rabbis put in. That's enough. No. We have to add our own protective fences. We have to add it because we're walking through a spiritual storm, and if you don't add your fences, you're going to be blown away. You're going to fall so far that you won't even realize, you won't even see the point of your origin. If you have an issue of tznius, you have clothes that are immodest, throw it away. Stop thinking maybe I'll lose weight and it will become modest. When that happens, guarantee you, if it's just the losing of the weight, it's already immodest. It's already a problem. Because if it's just a few centimeters or whatever, it's already a problem. Throw it away. Protect yourself. Make yourself a fence. If you have a problem with Lashon Hara, learn the halacha. There's so many classes on it. There's so many books. Learn the halachas. Stay away from people. Protect yourself. Put yourself a fence. Say, this person speaks a lot of Lashon Hara. I'm staying far away. And by the way, that's a very beneficial thing. Because if someone's speaking gossip about somebody else, lesson for life. If someone's speaking gossip about somebody else, chances are they're going to be speaking gossip about you. So why would you want to be friends with somebody that speaks Lashon Hara? Because just like they're speaking bad about somebody else, when you're not around, they're going to be speaking bad about you. Let's say somebody has an issue with guarding their eyes. So you put a filter You don't go to certain places. You put yourself these protective fences. And it's not only in the negative. That's like the gzeras. There's also in the positive, like takanas. Let's say you feel like you don't learn enough. So you set yourself a set time that every single day, no matter what, you're learning. Maybe it could be after praying, after davening. Maybe it's going to be right before you go to sleep. Maybe you have no time and you're working and you're so much. So you go and you do the daily dose. The Torah Anytime daily dose. You just do that just like 2 minutes a day. How could someone say you don't have 2 minutes a day? You download it and you listen at least to that. And by the way, so powerful. How powerful is the daily dose? That you go and you listen to it, but you also contemplate about it. There's such a powerful message that, just like what we spoke about in the beginning of this year, that if you hear something, and you say, there's so many layers that you could uncover with that. I'll finish off, even though I wouldn't even get to producing many students. We'll figure out when we'll plug that in. Or maybe I'll squeeze it in now. I don't know. We'll figure it out. The Chacham Avot Yosef brings down a Talmud Yerushalmi that brings down an interesting dialogue that they spoke to the serpent, the Nachash. And they asked the serpent, the snake, why are you commonly found in fences? And the Nachash replied, I was the first to breach the fence of the world. And the serpent over here, obviously we're talking about the evil inclination, the Yetzer Hara. The Gemara tries to understand why is it that the evil inclination begins by convincing people to break minor infractions, minor sins, and that is usually the fences. Where does the evil inclination try to get you? It tries to get you in the fences. Meaning that if you created a fence, that's where it's going to try to break you down. Because this all boils down to the original sin. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God told Adam HaRishon, you're not allowed to eat from the Eitz Hadas. He went on and he added a fence and tells Chava, you're not allowed to even touch from the Eitz Hadas. The Chava went and told the Nachash, told the snake, I'm not allowed to touch, I'm not allowed to eat it. The Nachash says, really, you're not allowed to touch it? Pushes her into it. She touches it and says, hey, you're still alive. You see nothing happen. Must be that you could eat it as well. So the way that he gets you is that he slowly gets you from the minor infraction. Says, what's the big deal? It's just a small sin. It's not even a sin. It's just the rabbi said it. You said it on yourself. It's really not a big deal. We know how we start rationalizing in our mind. And the evil inclination is planting these thoughts. And it's putting these rationalizations into our mind. It's not a big deal. It's just a small fence. And that's why it's interesting. The snakes are always in the fences physically. Because spiritually, that's where they originated from. They originated from the Nachash, the evil inclination, where from the fence. From going and getting us in the small areas. And that's where they get us till today. Start with a small sin. And fall in this. And once you fall in this, you'll be like, okay, what's the big deal? I'll go a little bit more. You do a little bit more. The sin, I don't want to give examples, because I can give examples from today until tomorrow. Everywhere from Shabbos to Tznius to guarding every area in your life, you could see that sins begin small. And they slowly compound and they slowly get bigger until you lose yourself. So the Torah tells us the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot says you have to put a fence in the Torah. You have to make sure that you're going and you're fencing it off and you're guarding yourself. Because if you don't guard yourself, you're going to fall. We are in a storm. We're in a place where there's so many uncertainties. There's so many temptations. There's so many things that are going on that we have to protect ourselves. The Mishnah is telling us, be very, very careful. Put fence after fence to make sure that we don't fall. I really wanted to finish the Mishnah, but the last part of the Mishnah that really is making fences, but the hour is getting late. So we'll try to sneak this in a different class. I don't know where, I don't know how, but B'ezrat Hashem we'll be able to sneak us in. But for now, I want to open up to questions. First question. Okay. I think everything starts with appreciation. That will cause people to be respectful to one another. I couldn't agree with you more. Hakar Satov is so huge. And by the way, people will be like, okay, let me work on something. Let me work on gratitude. Let me work on appreciation. It would work for maybe a day or two. If you want to work on something, you take your phone out. Not like later, after you take your phone out right now, and you add a reminder or a daily alarm, 2 p.m., whatever it is. I don't know, 5 p.m., 6 p.m. I'm going to work for the next 5 minutes on appreciation. I'm going to work in the next 5 minutes on guarding my eyes. I'm going to work in the next 10 minutes on Lashon Hara. If you don't put an alarm, a reminder every day, the growth is going to be very short-lived. Okay, here's a question on tznius. Is it tznius to wear a denim skirt, assuming that it's not tight and it's not long enough? Okay, this is an interesting question, depending on like the community and depending on the question. But generally speaking, the material is irrelevant. Again, there are certain communities that are more stricter and it's more important. And yes, if you live in that community, there are reasons for it. But from the practical halachic perspective, I'm not talking about adding fences and attack. Practical halachic perspective, the material, as long as it's not a flashy material, it's not it's not a problem as long as it covers the correct length and as long as it's not tight. Okay, hashkafically, is it okay for a post-seminary girl to work in a public school with kids in grades kindergarten to 3rd grade? It's an excellent question. No one ever asked me that. Generally, yes, but it's really depending on the person because we get affected from our surroundings. So, just to give you an example, the biggest rabbi's daughter or wife, you're not going to see them working in that environment. Why? Is it something wrong with it? You have people that work in a non-Jewish office all the time. What's the problem here? Even though it's allowed, it's not the preferable. So while it's allowed, it's not the most, the best option. But at the end of the day, it is allowed. And it also, the reason why I said it depends on the person, is that some people get more affected than others. So from the halachic perspective, yes, it is allowed. From the hashkafic perspective, it depends on the person. Okay, it doesn't always work that way. Trust me, I found out the hard way. In the past 3 weeks, I appreciated 2 people and tried to help them out, and it was taking for them a lot of money. Not everyone in the Jewish bubble is learning and growing. I don't fully understand that, but I agree with that aspect. Okay. Okay, last question. I think that's why there is halacha not to eat food with a non-Jew. Oh yeah, that's for intermarriage. Yes, there is halacha. Again, these are protected. Okay, wait, hold on. We have one final question that came in. Hi Rabbi, I've been single for 6.5 years. I've spoken to some religious women I know who are also very challenged with this as well. What advice do you have to offer for us single gals in meeting our zivug again? Me personally, I'm starting to wonder what is taking so long. Okay, so there's quite a lot to speak about that. Number one, and I'm only going to touch about a few points briefly just because of the time. Number one, the tests that come with being single is hard. It's not easy. There are spiritual tests, there are emotional tests, there are physical tests that come with it. And there are certain criteria, especially speaking of offenses, that need to be taken in these areas. Whether it's single that never married or whether divorced, I don't want to go into details, but I've been dealing with a lot of people on this, and it's a very, very dangerous area, and you have to be very careful, and you have to put on many, many fences. And trust me, I'm telling you from 90% of people that I speak to in this area, so necessary to add so many fences. But an understanding your question is why it's taking so long. There are many layers to uncover and unravel in that question. I'm not even going to go into it, but I'll just rattle off a few things of it. So number one, usually what I tell people is usually depending on the pickiness level. Now, it might not be that issue, and it might be that people might feel I'm not being picky. And I have spoken to people that I've become very close over the years, and people that they've opened up to me a lot, and they started off the kind of, I'm not picky. And then when I delved into and asked them questions, I realized and how they were so picky. They claimed that they were not picky, and in their mind they were correct. They didn't think that they were being picky, but they were so picky on it. So the number one thing that I will tell you to do is you speak to somebody, you speak to a mentor, you speak to a rabbi, you speak to a rebbitzin, and be like, okay, wait a minute, I'm dating this person and there's this issue. What do you feel that I should do? Like, sometimes it's a major issue, sometimes it's not a major issue, sometimes it's a major issue only to you, and then everybody is going to have to, decide according to that situation. But based off your own criteria, pickiness is a huge aspect. There's also a spiritual aspect in it. Your zivug is supposed to be on level A, and you're level Z. You're not even starting working at a kid, but you have to work on it. Like, he's never going to look at you, or she's never going to look at you if you're not on that level. So it depends on where you are, where you're holding in the spiritual sense. There could be other aspects in the spiritual sense. There could be certain, blocks that are happening, and we can get into that. It could be from a previous life. It could be from, issues now. It could be work that you need to do. You might not be ready to be married. You might be someone that has major anger issues, or major self-esteem issues, or selfish. There's so many things that if you get married, it'll be the worst thing for you because it would end in divorce. You have to work on yourself. So the list goes on, and it's very hard to diagnose something, even if you know all the details, because only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows. So what I would recommend is to go through your life and see where can I improve, and sometimes you may not know where you need to improve, and this is where it comes so important to speak to somebody, because somebody else could look at it from a bird's eye view, and they're able to go and look at it, and they're able to go and say, maybe you have to focus on this angle, maybe this is not such a big, so there's so many times where I speak to people and they think that they're so right in their stance, and I'm like, no, you're far off. Like, I can't tell you, how many people that they're single and they're older and they have such unrealistic expectations. And I told them straight, usually if there's an issue, I say it straight out. 1 out of 2 times I would say people don't call me back because of that, but whatever it is, it is. I feel like I need to say it. The idea behind it is that some people are stuck in a certain way and they have to change it. In other instances, it's not your fault. It's Min HaShamayim, and this is something that, it's not the right time yet. So there's very hard to say what the right reason is, but definitely it would be an apropos thing to speak to somebody about this, and to go through your life, and to go through, the pickiness. These are a few things that just, you could go through, but really could speak about a whole class on this. Okay. Comments, so I'm not going to go through that, but thank you for the comments. Okay. Looks like that is all the questions. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for coming. Again, anybody who wants to join us on our week, hopefully it should be continuously weekly Zoom class, please feel free to reach out to me. You can be added on to the WhatsApp chat, and that is, you can email me at rabbizitron@torahanytime.com, and we could add you to the chat, and it's open to anybody who wants to join on Thursday nights, usually from 9 to 10 p.m. Thank you all for joining, and until next time, may you have an amazing, successful week. Wherever you listen to this, may you have a successful life. Just bracha v'hatzlacha ad bli dai.